Hi, I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. Well, after many requests and as the temperatures outdoor begin to drop slightly, I've been requested by many of my subscribers to return to the great outdoors. And today, we're shooting in my backyard again. Fall is in the air and the kids are finally back in school, and we as parents can actually have the opportunity to breathe a little bit. Now, coming off my real estate photography seminar down here in Naples, I had B&H Photo send me this. This is the Canon 11-24mm f4, a Goliath of a lens. It screams wide angle, and it tips a price point that will likely make you scream bloody murder as well. In fact, the 11-24 brings the widest full-frame equivalent non-fisheye perspective lens in mass production in the marketplace today. Not only does 11mm stretch the boundaries for wide-angle zoom lenses, but at $2,999, one must ask themselves if it's worth it. And just because the lens can shoot at 11mm, does that mean you should? Well, let's have a look. So first up is the build, and the 11-24 is mostly true to Canon's L lens legacy in terms of how the lens is assembled. As for the quality materials, however, this one definitely errs more on the side of plasticky, with the notable exception of the mount, which is in fact made out of metal. The focus ring is smooth and rotates with some resistance, but I'd almost expect a little bit more. The zoom ring, on the other hand, is tight, precise, and has a firm level of resistance that you'd expect from an L-series lens. The pedal-shaped lens hood is permanently attached. The lens cap is big and just about the size of a large beef patty. On the inside, it's a complex formula of 16 elements arranged in 11 groups. And included in that formula is one super UD element, or ultra-low dispersion, and one UD element to help reduce chromatic aberrations. There are also 4 aspherical elements to help minimize distortion throughout the zoom range. Additionally, Canon has put on a sub-wavelength coating and an air sphere coating, which reduce backlit flaring and ghosting in strong lighting conditions. The aperture ranges from f4 all the way to f22, and there are 9 rounded aperture blades. But really, at 11mm in f4, how much background blur can you possibly hope to achieve? Like many other wide-angle lenses, the bulbous nature of that front element prevents the use of traditional screw-on filters. But Canon has given the lens the ability to insert gel filters, which you can cut to size and insert behind the lens's rear element. Finally, the lens tips the physical scale at 2.6 pounds or 1.18 kilograms, and that's heavy. So you may want to consider investing in a tripod or a monopod to take some of the pressure off your arms, back, and shoulders. Finally, the lens is in fact dust and moisture resistant. And at $3 grand, I should be able to go swimming with this thing. You can't, I'm just being cheeky. So all in, it's a tightly assembled specimen of high-grade plastics, rubberized focus and zoom rings. It's just a behemoth of a lens. I just wish there were more substantial components in its overall construction. So for build, the 11-24 gets a 9 out of 10. Next up is autofocus speed and accuracy. I bring this point up every time I review a wide-angle lens, and the 11-24 falls into this category too. Because in general, when you're shooting a wide-angle lens, you're trying to get everything in the whole scene in focus. That is, we're really not trying to dazzle everyone with a shallow depth of field and subject isolation. On the contrary, a wide-angle lens by its very nature is designed to focus on an entire scene and get the whole thing in focus. Meaning that blazing fast autofocus is really nice, but it's not a deal breaker if a wide-angle lens doesn't have it. That said, the 11-24 has Canon's latest ultrasonic AF motor, and it focuses fast, really fast. And it's really nice, but again, speaking for myself, if I'm shooting a home or architecture, I'm moving at a snail's pace, and really fast autofocus doesn't mean a whole lot to me. However, if you like to do offbeat kinds of photography, let's say you like to photograph skateboarders at a skate park from weird angles, then the fast autofocus of the 11-24 could in fact come in handy. By the way, the minimum focus distance is just over 11 inches, which actually gives the 11-24 some value as a macro lens. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to focus around the room here, and the beep is on, so you'll be able to hear how fast the lens focuses. So for starters, I'm going to focus on something far away. You hear that? Now something up close. And oh, far away again, and up close again. I think you get the idea. In the end, it's ridiculously fast and crazy accurate, which means there's nothing to fault here. But again, fast AF on a wide-angle lens is just a nice bonus. But as such, the 11-24 gets a 10 out of 10 for autofocus speed and accuracy. So next up are the optics, and like most wide-angle lenses, there is definitely some extreme edge softness and some serious distortion. But in the center, the 11-24 is in fact tack sharp from f4 all the way through the zoom range, and the lens remains sharp until diffraction sets in at about f13. Flare is reasonably well controlled, and chromatic aberrations are essentially irrelevant, especially in field use, which is to say you need to zoom in and really pixel peep at about 100% to even notice them. But let's face it, the real trick here is how well does it perform at 11 millimeters? Well, if you're going to make a lens that wide, you just have to expect some physical compromises that are, frankly, extremely difficult to overcome. For starters, the aforementioned lack of edge sharpness. And though the 11-24 isn't exceptional at the extreme edges, what ultra-wide on a full-frame camera is? Another expectation is distortion, and even though Canon claims that distortion is well controlled, I found the lens to exhibit a lot of distortion, especially at 11 millimeters. In fact, in my 10 years plus of real estate photography, the 4 weeks that I've used this lens, I can tell you with a straight face that this is the most complaints that I've received in my career about a lens actually being too wide. But again, it's 11 millimeters. However, at 14 millimeters, which is where a certain other competitor's ultra-wide-angle lens starts, distortion is in fact extremely well controlled, at least for my purposes, because I'm generally using the 11-24 at f8, and my results are pretty darn exceptional, even at 11 millimeters. Distortion and extreme edge performance accepted. There is one area, however, where the 11 millimeters does in fact come in handy. Living in this boating community down here in Naples, Florida, I photograph a lot of big yachts for sale. And as big as some of these yachts are, the heads, or the bathrooms, and the guest staterooms are really tiny. And in those instances, I found the 11-24 does an exceptional job at 11 millimeters. Again, there's distortion, but 11 millimeters allows me to get it all in, and that's nice. But it also kind of limits the use that I'm getting from 11 millimeters. Anyway, don't take my word for it. See for yourself. As with all of my reviews, the next 2 to 3 minutes will be a series of stills and video clips demonstrating the optical virtues of the Canon 11-24mm f4 lens. And if you're a real estate or architectural photography professional, the Canon 11-24 holds up as a very viable option in a very competitive real estate lens marketplace. So last up is value. And this is a tough one because on the one hand, you have a really expensive lens, tipping the register at an eye-popping price point just under $3,000. That's a lot of money, especially when you consider that Sigma just announced their new 12-24 f4 art lens at Photokina for about 50% of the price of the Canon. And given Sigma's exceptional track record with their art series lenses, if you need something in this focal range, you may want to wait and see what the verdicts are on the new Sigma. But back to the Canon. On the one hand, you have 11mm on the wide end, and that's a new frontier for ultrawides on a full-frame camera. And though it's not optically perfect, it is really good, especially in the center of the frame. But at $2,999, you have to ask yourself, is this lens worth it? Well, I can't answer that question for you, but what I can tell you is that my clients' feedback from the images that I've taken with this lens are by and large very strong. But given that I find myself zooming in rather frequently with the 11-24 to say 13 or 15mm, primarily to give the scene less distortion and more realism, I find myself questioning the value of 11mm, especially given how many lower priced alternatives exist in the marketplace. Granted, they're not as wide, but most of them are 40 to 60% less expensive than the Canon. So for value, 11mm aside, the 11-24 gets a 6 out of 10. So to wrap up this review, we gave the Canon 11-24mm f4L lens a 41.5 out of 50 and a recommended rating. The final word. Canon definitely got the attention of extreme wide-angle shooters everywhere when they announced the 11-24mm f4L lens, and with good reason, as 11mm represented a new frontier for ultra-wide-angle shooting on a full-frame camera in the marketplace today. Now, as we mentioned, edge sharpness definitely suffers mightily at 11mm and f4, but for my purposes, and likely for the purposes of the majority of the people who are going to use this lens, we're often stopping down to f8 and zooming in to 12, 13, or even 14mm, a place where distortion becomes less relevant and edge sharpness improves dramatically. But if you're doing that with this lens, zooming in that is, then the simple fact of the matter is, your money is probably better spent elsewhere. Think the Tamron 15-30, or even the newly announced Sigma 12-24 f4 Art Series lens. Because as nice as 11mm is, I just found that in my line of work, I don't feel like I'm using it often enough to justify the price point of this beautiful beast. Moreover, as mentioned previously, I've gotten a lot of complaints about the extreme edge distortions at 11mm as well. Now, one minor caveat, also mentioned earlier, if you often shoot dwellings with really tight rooms, I'm thinking yachts, complete with their tiny bathrooms and staterooms, then there may in fact be a place for an 11mm lens. Unfortunately for me, that need doesn't occur often enough to justify this kind of expense. So to answer the original question, just because a lens can go to 11mm, does that mean you should too? Likely, you're going to find that the answer to that question is probably no. And something in the 14 to 17mm range will more than likely best suit your needs as a real estate or architectural photography professional. This is Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. If you like these reviews, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, happy shooting.